In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains what fundamental question you need to ask regarding how you need to act in the world.
A tremendous amount of what constitutes the intrinsic meaning of life can be found in that attempt to continually expand and reorganize as you're expanding. Because this is a Jungian idea. I mean, human beings are cognitively dynamic creatures, and we find intrinsic worth in participating in that cognitively dynamic process. So, and then I think outside of that, there's another question, which is, well, what is it exactly that you're aiming at? And my experience has taught me, and this is partly a consequence of studying archetypes for a very long period of time, I think the fundamental question that's on the very outer reaches of the hierarchy that's associated with ethics and morality is, are you trying to make the world a better place or a worse place? And I believe that every time you make a decision, when you could go one way or you could go another, that in some sense you're acting out your conviction in relationship to that highest order question. You know, and you say, well, would people really work to make the world a worse place? And the answer to that is, well, if you have to ask that question, then you should open your eyes, because we know the answer to that. And the whole 20th century was full of decades and decades. In fact, the most important information that you can derive from an analysis of the 20th century is that it's pretty damn certain that people are willing to work to make everything as terrible as they possibly can. And that's definitely worth considering, because if people are willing to do that and motivated to do that, that probably means that you're willing to do that and motivated to do it too. And I think it's fairly easy to understand why. I think the reason that people are motivated to do that sort of thing, is to do terrible things, is because they're angry at the conditions of their life. They're angry at the conditions of being, because being is composed of suffering and vulnerability, and people lose and they suffer and they get resentful and angry about that, and they feel hard done by, and that the entire structure of the world is aimed against them in some unfair manner, and then they get revengeful and corrupt and feel that everything that they do is justifiable given how much torment and suffering they've been living through. And once you move into that particular realm of thinking, your ability to start to make things worse starts to accelerate exponentially. And I don't believe there's a single person on the planet who hasn't been in a situation where something has happened to them that's sufficiently disappointing and tragic so that their thoughts turn to revenge and destruction. I think that happens to people all the time. And it's understandable, but the problem is it seems to be extraordinarily counterproductive. And all it does is make the situation that everybody's complaining about worse instead of better. And so what seems to be the case is that you have to bear the fact that you're incomplete and vulnerable and underdeveloped and weak in many ways, without becoming vengeful and corrupted by your knowledge of that, and while still trying to do everything you can to make being better rather than worse. And I think the upside of that mode of thinking is, I don't believe that there's anything that's more engaging and interesting than continued attempts to make things better. The problem is, it requires the adoption of a tremendous amount of responsibility, right? And I think that it's the unwillingness to accept responsibility that stops people from waking up and becoming enlightened. You know, if you want to make the world a better place, then you have to take responsibility for all of the ways that you look at the world, and everything that you act out, and all the things that you say. And it means you have to pay a tremendous amount of attention to what you're doing as a consequence, and that's very difficult. And it's also frightening, because it means that you have to entertain the hypothesis that the things that you're doing are important. You know, I think part of the reason why our culture has taken such a nihilistic bent is because people have actually decided that life would be a lot easier if it didn't have any meaning. People run around and complain about the fact that life is meaninglessness, or that life is meaningless. And we've drawn that conclusion from both a rational and empirical perspective. And people will tell you that they came to that conclusion purely logically and scientifically. But when I look at that claim, I think, well, maybe you want life to be meaningless because it lets you off the hook. If everything you do hasn't got any value, then why do you have to pay any attention to it? You can do whatever you want. And if it's the opposite, if everything you do has meaning and it's important, well then you better be awake, because what you do matters, and then you get all the meaning you want, but the price you have to pay for that is that you have to take responsibility. And if you start to seriously entertain the idea that with every decision you take, you're tilting the world either towards heaven or towards hell, then that can instantly start making you a lot more serious about what you choose to do and not do. And my understanding of personality development and personality development in relationship to history is that that is exactly what is the case when you're making decisions in your life. You face a field of infinite potential, and you use your will for good or evil in order to shape it into what it's going to be. And that's really what a human being is. A human being is the sort of creature that can do that.
Thanks for watching.